Namaste, Ananya, and welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you here. How are you?
Namaste. Thank you so much. Really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And first of all, for those tuning in, we're more than welcome you to be listening to this interesting episode with Ananya. We're going to touch upon, a lot of interesting thing and sort of like the importance and the value of wearing multiple hats, because that's something that you've been doing a lot, Ananya. And I think this is very key for like the young sport professionals out there, the students that are trying to find their path, right? A good way to do that is by wearing multiple hats, exploring things that are happening in the industry. And I'm excited to have you here, and it's going to be fun like diving into that very shortly. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about these sort of things, that wants to get tips from leaders and industry professionals like Ananya, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, like it, comment what you think is great, and maybe some questions or thoughts that you have that what we can improve. So with that, Ananya, we're just going to dive right into it, because you were recently the global sport business strategy at Rakuten, but you updated, or you changed your role there now. So what is your new role, and what are some of your key responsibilities that you're doing for Rakuten?
Sure. So thank you for that question. Yes, I started off at Rakuten with COVID, it just seems like a lifetime ago, but
Yeah, right.
I started at the start of COVID, which is in March, and I shifted to Tokyo for this new role, which was as a strategist. So it was sort of looking at the overall business side of sports business in Rakuten, and now I've kind of switched more to interest areas within marketing and marketing partnerships for our global partnerships office, which still falls under the sports business umbrella. Nice. At Rakuten Sports. Nice. So for those who are kind of unaware, Rakuten is, of course, a global leader in internet services, and we've got multiple other departments with fintech and communications and sports being one of our departments, spread globally. Right. So while we have this whole sponsorship side to sports, where we're the global innovation partner of FC Barcelona and on the jersey patch of the Warriors, the Golden State Warriors, we also have a different business side to the sports entity, which is to generate newer opportunities, look out for revenue, generate new IP. So my role is primarily that. It's nice. To make sure that the assets that we have internally can be marketed better, and the clients that we work with externally can also be marketed, and we can sort of generate new IP and activations around that.
That's awesome. And it's sort of like the best of both worlds in a sense, right? Working so closely, like for a major company, and then working with like these amazing sport entities, it must be quite exciting. How has it been working for Recruitment so far, and just being part of like this sort of like major company?
Yeah, it's always exciting. I remember applying for the role. I was obviously very much excited to kind of start diving into things.
Right.
Fortunately or unfortunately, and this is with everybody, COVID happened, and that has its own ups and downs.
For sure.
So of course, a lot of things, a lot of things kind of change, but you still learn the ropes. My colleagues, the seniors, have been pretty supportive in terms of giving us a voice to bring forth. It's almost like working for a startup within a larger corporation, which has been the exciting part as well. Yeah. And I think another advantage of working for a bigger company is you not only get to learn from the department you're working for, which is sports in my case, but also kind of expanding into different departments that exist within the company. And if you kind of have the leverage to sit down for a meeting, just observe and take in all the information, that in itself gives you a lot of idea on how to integrate the different departments within sports. So that's kind of been the exciting part of being in Rakuten as well.
No, I can imagine. But we haven't talked about this though, but you're actually, based in Tokyo. So how was like, okay, I gotta go and work in Tokyo. Like where did that come from?
Wow. Well, I don't know where it came from, to be honest.
Right.
I was really excited about working for a company like Rakuten, for Rakuten specifically. I did know that I was very much enticed by or attracted to the market in Asia in general.
Yeah, that makes
I am
sense.
from India originally.
Yeah.
And so the market in Asia has always intrigued me. to learn from a market such as Japan in sports, which is sort of which has already done so much and developed so many sports properties with the ones that we see, but also has so much more potential that needs to be tapped into. That was the challenge that I wanted to get into early on in my career. And that's how the move to Japan and Tokyo came about. And Rakuten was obviously the bridge that made that happen.
That's awesome. I mean, like, and you got to explore the world, right? You got to see how things is moving, what's going on in the world, and get new inputs.
That's another thing. I mean, I think that's a very good point. So I'm just going to add on to that. I feel early on in your career, you kind of have an advantage to move anywhere across the world
Right.
without the burden of having excess responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I think how much that can open you up and the exposure that can give to you can go beyond maybe going for an educational degree abroad. So you might as well utilize those opportunities if you do get to work in another market that kind of falls in the field of work that you want to do.
Absolutely. I mean, like, and of course, like in the current situation, it's a little bit hard, like, taking that stab with the pandemic. But I mean, like, there's a lot of remote opportunities that you can do to sort of like get that, I guess, peek or insight into like global companies, maybe like Rakuten, like big and small companies out there that are looking for remote work. So that's something that you guys definitely should look into. But Ananya, you also been like having like sort of like an entrepreneurial spirit, right? You with your initiative with like the Sportsbiz Show, and the podcast, of course. And how sort of like did this come to life, and what is sort of your goal and ambitions with the podcast? I mean, like, I see it as sort of like a side project, side hustle, but what is sort of your goal and ambitions with it?
Well, so for the uninitiated, the Sportsbiz Show sort of started, or the idea was planted in that gap before I was starting my job.
Right.
And so before moving to Tokyo, I was fresh from grad school and back spending some time with family. But I realized after my experience in New York how developed the market was, but also how interconnected everybody was. And coming back to India, I kind of saw that gap. While I was already having conversations with a lot of these executives, I thought, well, that's an idea. Why not sort of present that and package that to the world and spread information and awareness that way. Maybe do it consistently so that I can manage that with the job. And that's kind of how the idea was formulated. And soon enough it kind of fine-tuned itself into a more global sports project, where now I'm not just focusing on Indian content, but kind of also expanding into some great, cool global topics, which hopefully everybody will get to hear about very soon. And that's how the name got changed from India Sportsbiz Talks to the Sportsbiz Show.
Nice.
And that's been a learning in itself, is just kind of like making sure you utilize the voice that you have. And that's been my goal with this.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's also like great opportunity to speak with a lot of knowledgeable people, right? To learn. And I mean, like, I always say this too, like, from every podcast that we have, of course, like, we want to help these students and young professionals like get like some insights, but I'm learning new stuff every day. Like, I'm super happy about it. And I mean, like, I'm just like, soaking in. And I think it's important that like that people realize like your learning never stops, right? And whether you're, 19 or you're 30 or you're 40 or 50 or whatever that is, like, your learning never stops. And I think that's important for people to always try to like stimulate their senses and their knowledge to continue developing, because also the industry is always moving forward, right? So these sort of like insights, the podcast show that you have and everything, like, is way of like learning from that. And that's very important when you're a young student. But we're gonna go back a little bit into like, of course, and you mentioned that you explored, of course, like the sport industry a little bit in New York, and you had opportunity to take your MS in sport management there at Columbia University. And first of all, like why USA? I mean, like, I gotta ask. I went to San Francisco, like, so I gotta like hear your thought process on it, and how has the program sort of like enhanced your journey in the sport industry?
I mean, I can definitely hope, or I can at least say our answers might be very similar as to why we probably chose the US to kind of extend our education in sports.
I'm excited
But for me,
to hear.
absolutely. No, for me, how sports management kind of came about was I used to play for my state in my undergrad in India. I was a basketball player.
Nice.
And for me, it was always kind of about converting that passion into a career, and just needed a pathway to do that. The reason I chose to, of course, go to the US was of how, for me, okay, so I'll step backwards, and this is a question that a lot of students reach out to me for as well. But the way to choose a program essentially could be divided into a few things. And I feel like take this as a way to invest in your education versus go for a degree that gets you a job, because
Right.
that's never guaranteed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hustle that goes behind getting a job, let alone just going to a grand institution. In
Right.
Columbia, just the name in itself, and of course New York City and all the advantages that that provides are great. But to choose an institution which you think will expose you to different things, and that's kind of what drew me to Rakuten as well. So I'll relate the two answers. Rakuten, working here is not just for working in sports, but also
Yep.
expanding your work exposure and your trajectory into different domains and kind of learning and integrating that. And I think that's the advantage that the US provides, because apart from sports, they also have a lot of other developed markets which integrate very directly with sports, whether that's entertainment, music, or
Mhm.
finance, or tech. And I think that those are the advantages that I went for
Right.
as a country and as a city in New York. Other than that, the Columbia in general also provides you not just a great sports management program, but within the School of Professional Studies where the program is enlisted,
Right.
there's, plenty other courses where you can interact with people across strategic communications and analytics, and that kind of exposes you to a whole different world. So always choose a course that, firstly, of course, be self-aware in what works for you, but then
Yep.
choose a course that kind of doesn't pigeonhole you but expands your horizons. So those were sort of my points in choosing Columbia and choosing New York, and subsequently the US.
No, but I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, like, I think it's a really valid point of like what you're bringing out of like, you know, not just go to LA because of LA, right? So sort of like as an example, right? But like, what was it like? Of course, like first, like what kind of program would suit you, and second of all, like what can that program offer that will help you towards your goal or your ambitions in that particular field, right? I mean, like talking about like USF, right? For me, it was literally the only choice I felt like was the best for me because their focus on getting experience and having that flexibility in their workday was sort of like, okay, that's how I'm gonna learn. Like I don't want to be the person that sits in the classroom like from 8 a.m. to 4 every day. Like I want to be out there learning. And of course, there's other programs
Practical, yeah.
that do this. And I'm not saying like they're the only one, but this was one of my key factors for like why I chose USF. And I think like these are some of the stuff that you have to keep in mind when you're like, of course, get that exploring outside, but like, what are the programs offering that are going to help you succeed? Like, what is their focus? And of course, there's a lot of great programs, but it's also based on your goals, right? Of like, if you want to be like, maybe like a professor for a sport university or sport management or something like that, then maybe a more like, scientific, research route would make sense. And then if you want more a practical approach or like maybe like someone that are focusing more on college athletics, then look for schools that have that as their emphasis, that are really good at that, because that's what's going to help you reach your goal. And I think a lot of
Exactly.
us sort of like have this scope of like, oh, we want to work maybe in professional sports, or we want to do college sports, or we want to do like esports or what that might be. And that could give you some easy guidelines to like sort of start looking for what kind of programs that is. Maybe that's in New York, maybe that's in Columbia, maybe that's at San Francisco, maybe that's in Norway.
Yeah.
And sort of like exploring that options. I think it's very important, and it's a really good point, Ananya. I think that's something that people that are listening here should take from this is very important.
Hopefully, yeah, absolutely. I think you touched upon all the points too, as in having the right ecosystem, making sure you have that ecosystem. I remember every time we were at Columbia as well, we were always told to kind of step outside that bubble and
Yeah.
explore the city we're in or explore other avenues which can help us grow and expand. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what you touched upon as well. So it makes absolute sense.
Well, I mean, like in addition to your education, though, like getting experience is really important, and a great way to do that is, the value of internships, volunteering, and this is something that you've been really active on, like, from day one, pretty much, as an intern, board member, and a volunteer. Like, what have you learned from, exploring the industry so far, and sort of like, well, why are these kind of roles so important when you're starting your sports career? Because a lot of people talk about it, but like, what's your thoughts around this, and why is this important for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious from the get-go because there's so many nuances to the sports industry. There's this whole development side, then there's this whole administrative side, there's
Like,
the business side, of course. So it's basically you take up as many opportunities to better understand what works for you in the long run. Um, and the other aspect that comes with that is if you're a young professional, and since you asked about students and how students can kind of better expand their career,
right,
it's a chicken egg situation. A lot of employers will look for work experience, whereas
right,
students right out of grad school or undergrad won't have that.
right.
So there are these opportunities that are out there for you to chase and grab, which you can build on your resume upon and your
Yeah,
CV upon, and then take that to the employer to better your chances of getting a job or landing
right,
an internship. And that's where these opportunities come in handy. So to look for an ecosystem which can provide you opportunities, and today the world's come closer because of COVID.
sure.
I mean, everything is digital, so you
Yeah,
don't really need to be in a particular city or a country. You can do remote internships, and those are happening far and wide, in a lot of companies, a lot of teams, brands, and leagues. And I think that opportunity is up for grabs for people. So if people are sitting at home, I feel like just take up multiple opportunities, balance your time, and make sure you not only just to build your resume, but also kind of to understand where you would fit in the sports industry. So when you start a full-time job, you're
absolutely.
not confused or not, you know, again, sort of pigeonholing yourself and taking steps back. You're only moving forward.
Right. No, I think it's really valid. And just to follow up on that too, though, when you were in New York, like at University of Columbia, like, how did you start your getting your experience?
Well, so I'm sure this could happen with a lot of people. The university, of course, is going to try to provide you opportunities, but you have to realize then those are the same opportunities everybody is fighting for. So, how do you differentiate yourself and also start looking outside of that to develop similar opportunities and grab them? I remember just cold emailing, cold calling people and finding out opportunities, whether that was paid or unpaid.
Yeah.
Really depends on, I mean, that's a whole other debate of whether opportunities
Sure.
should be paid or
Sure.
unpaid, but
Sure.
maybe for another time. But
Yeah.
I do say this to everybody, depending on the experience level you're in, or you're at, and what you're comfortable with, and if you can manage it, go for any opportunity that's out there. It's all about opening doors for yourself.
Right.
So even if one opportunity leads to a no, by randomly sort of reaching out to people or going to conferences and networking with people,
Sure.
there's a lot more that can come out of it if you persevere and show some tenacity.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how it happens. You convert multiple no's into yeses, and you know this better as an entrepreneur than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's really how it happens when you're kind of starting out as well.
But I mean, like, honestly, this is why I asked, because I wanted you to, that's exactly the answer I was hoping for. Just to like showcase that, the importance of putting down the effort. Like at the end of the day, like the industry is so competitive. There's a lot of, people fighting for the same kind of jobs. And of course, the universities are trying their best and they want to provide, but you got to look, you got to take the initiative. No one is waiting for you. You have to take that first step, and this is sort of like why we try to push on this through the podcast, to the information, that at the end of the day, like, it comes down to you got to showcase your passion, and if you do that, like, Ananya, you've been exploring a lot of the industry. Now you're working for Rakuten. You have your own Sportsbiz Show. Like, if you put down the effort, a lot of things can happen. And that's essentially, why this is important. And I mean, like, of course, we've been talking a lot about like. So I think we've been touching a lot about some tips already. But if you would give like like some, I don't know, like 1, 2, 3 like key tips that you would provide for like students trying to find their path in the industry, like what are some of the things that they should keep in mind?
This is such an important question. It sounds so simple, but it's so complicated because there's just so much information out there, and I'm sure people are already overwhelmed with people telling them what to do and what not to do.
Right.
I feel like the first thing I just advise everybody to avoid mistakes and just expedite the process is to make sure to know who you are. And if that means doing the most nerdy thing, like creating a SWOT analysis of yourself and your strengths,
Right.
weaknesses, and the threats, do that.
That's
Just
awesome.
build a SWOT for yourself, build a white paper, build pros and cons for yourself, and just kind of understand who you are and what works for you, and then start tackling companies or non-profits or for-profits, depending on what your goals are.
Right.
The other thing I would advise, and this is again something that's probably been spoken about a lot, is patience.
Yeah.
It took me, despite all the effort that we're speaking about, took me a few months to land a job and another few months to start an initiative. And not just to start it, anybody I feel like can start something today with the low barriers to entry, but to sustain it and continue it takes time and takes a lot more strategy. So just to be patient with yourself and patient with the opportunities, and to kind of build that resistance where the no's will eventually be converted into yeses. So I think those are kind of two key opportunities. And I think the rest we sort of touched upon is to make sure you're always learning, you're always networking. There's so many platforms. There's such amazing people out there to help you, like your podcast, that's providing value to a lot of people. So there's so much free content out there as well for you to kind of grab on. Make sure you do that and learn as much as possible, because at the end, it's your effort that's going to matter more.
Absolutely. I think that's some really great advice. And I mean, like, I think it's important too, what you talked about. We just talked about that at another forum too, of like understanding your values and your beliefs, right? What is important for you. And in that, of course, like understanding your strengths and weaknesses. And I mean, like, we all have strengths and weaknesses. Like, it's totally fine, but it's about being aware of those and understanding, okay, how can you improve? Like, understanding, like, also, like, I mean, like, when you're in a team or you're building a team, like, I mean, like, I have stuff I'm really good at, and then I bring people in that are better at me on other stuff. That's how it works. That's how you work together. And that's totally fine. No one is perfect. Like, everyone has their skills and their stuff that they aren't as good as. And that's totally fine. But it's about you understanding that and knowing, okay, this is where I can provide the most value, and this is stuff where I can learn or where I need help. And always trying to, like, improve, okay, how can I get my skill set to be better? How can I, work on my weaknesses or stuff like that? So you can kind of, like, always try to, like, elevate yourself. And that's essentially what it comes down to. And it's a good first step, know yourself. And I think with that, I mean, like, with you, Ananya, I mean, like, from your side, like, what are some of your plans moving forward now? I mean, like, you're obviously working for Rakuten, but and sort of like having that Sportsbiz Show, but sort of like as a sport professional, as an entrepreneur, like, what are some of your plans moving forward? Like, do you have any milestones or stuff that you have in your mind?
So many of them. But I know we only have limited time on this podcast.
Right.
But to start with, of course, the entrepreneurial spirit in me will always stay alive.
That's awesome.
At the moment, I'm, just kind of trying to learn as much as I can, do everything that I did and not slack off. I feel like everybody who's sort of starting a new job or a new position, just make sure you're still continuing to do all the things that you did before getting the job as well. Just to kind of keep learning, keep growing. So the idea is to keep doing that and contribute in the best way possible to the place I'm in, and obviously unfold to bigger and better things in the future.
That's great. And from a professional standpoint, like do you want to continue like with Rakuten? Like, are there stuff that like do you enjoy being in Tokyo? Like, would you want to explore more of the world? Like, what are some of your thoughts?
I'll be pretty bullish in saying this. I consider myself a global citizen now, having spent some time across a few
That's awesome.
cities.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'll ever let the opportunity of being global, whether that's taking India to the world or bringing the world to India or doing that with Japan,
Right.
I don't think I'm ever going to let go of that. And
That's
I
good.
think that's kind of where most of my mind anyway edges towards.
Yeah.
So if that happens with Rakuten, I look forward to that. Or if that happens on its own,
Right.
I think that's something I'll keep in mind as well. But the idea is just to sort of move upwards while grabbing all the opportunities that I can get in my way.
That's awesome, Ananya. Well, with that, Ananya, I just wanted to thank you so much, for sharing your insights, your tips with us, and for all you listening. If this is something that you think is interesting, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And sign up at Sporting Global if you haven't already. We have the website, we have the apps as well. Like, it's your platform to connect with people like Ananya. Look for opportunities. There's a lot of remote opportunities out there now as well from global companies. Get your taste of the global sport industry, and of course, network with similar people. It's a great place to do it. I mean, like, it's hard now to attend physical conferences and all this stuff because of the pandemic. So now it's like, use the digital assets that you have. Make sure to tune into Ananya's podcast, talk with her, see what's going on, and try to, like, stay positive in this pandemic, and try to learn. That's what's going to keep you forward. And with that, Ananya, I would just thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This has been such a great conversation. And I look forward to continuing and wish you the best with the work that you're doing at Sporting Global. I'm sure it's going to help so many more people, students and professionals.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ananya. And with every video we create, we always finish with "Vi snakkes," which means see you later in Norwegian. So now you know some Norwegian too.
I'm excited to use that sometime.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Ananya.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.